Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the folks at Amazon Music for partnering with us on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. But more on this later. Right then, let's get right into today's episode. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Inside Line F1 podcast, where normally when we have guests on the show, we normally tend to bring in lots of paddock journalists, lots of team bosses, lots of people who have commentated on the sport. But today we have some proper racing royalty, someone who's not just raced in Formula One, but also Le Mans, DTM, and so many other championships, and has also been a lead voice of Formula One in Germany for over 2 decades now. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so glad that we have Christian Danner on the show today on the Inside Line F1 podcast. And Christian, firstly, can I just say how glad I am to speak to you? Because when Kunal told me that you would be coming on, I just, again, for a reference, looked at your record and the teams you've raced with, the tracks you've raced at, the cars you've driven and the people you've raced against, and then what you've achieved as well. I mean, for a motorsport fan, your record will blow anyone's mind.
Well, don't exaggerate. I had a fairly good career, to be perfectly honest, and I was lucky enough to actually do all these different things. You know, there is not many people who have raced in Formula One and Formula 2, 3000, in Formula Nippon in Japan. I was racing Indy cars in the States. I was doing Le Mans, all the long distance stuff with the sports cars. I did all sorts of touring car things in smaller touring cars and bigger touring cars. So at the end of the day, I had a good career. I spent a fair bit of my life in the top end of the global motorsports business. And that's fine, you know. And when I look back, I'm still healthy, I'm still fit. So I still love it.
Wait, but the first question that comes into my mind looking at all of this is, how do you transition? And that's a very nerdy question from mine to ask, because Indy cars are so light, rear heavy. Touring cars are so, heavy but front-ended in that regard. Formula One cars must have been a totally different experience. For you, you've experienced the whole lot.
Well, you see, every racing car has to tell you a different story, to be perfectly honest. In general, the world is divided in two parts once you talk circuit racing. There is single-seater racing cars, there's Formula cars, and tin tops or sports cars with a roof on it. So these two you have to separate, because the only true racing car is a single-seater racing car. That is the only thoroughbred car that I would call a racing car. All the others are cars that you can race, and they are fantastic cars, and they're super machines, and everything are, sometimes or some of them are actually extremely fast. However, the feeling in a single-seater is something that only a single-seater gives you. From a driver's perspective, from a driver's point of view, single-seater racing cars are the only thorough, real racing cars. How to adapt is kind of tricky because, nowadays, Formula One drivers tend to stay in Formula One and that's it. And then they eventually fall out of Formula One and do a bit of this, that, and the other, and then they retire. In my days, it was quite different because I had to race everything because I didn't earn any money otherwise. So there was touring cars with the BMW M3s, and there was next weekend. In 1985, I was doing everything you can imagine. I did Formula One to step in for Jonathan Palmer in these days, did my first Grand Prix. I won the Formula 3000 championship. I did Formula 3000 races in the Caribbean. I was actually doing the entire World Championship for the Group C then, which was sports cars. Nowadays it would be LMDH or LM prototypes, whatever. And I even did my first Formula 3 race after I did my first Formula 1 Grand Prix in Macau. So I had to do all that because I had no choice. And because I have been doing it all the way through my career, I knew exactly what I had to expect. Okay, so the attitude of a racing car, a single-seater racing car, is obviously very different compared to a touring car. But you to adapt is difficult, but it's got a lot to do with experience. You know what you're expecting. Touring cars are a lot slower, a lot less downforce, a lot less responsive.
There you are.
But once you know what you're doing, you can cope with it and you can adapt. It's not all that difficult. You need to know what you want to do, and then you can do it.
But wait, you mentioned such an interesting nugget there. Racing in Formula 3000 after Formula 1. Why did that happen eventually? I mean, you must have gotten in 1985, right? And then eventually
Yeah.
going back to Formula 3000, was it a conscious choice that you had to make, or was it something that was just thrust upon you?
Well, coming back to that rather strange thing that we're not talking about 3000, we're talking about Formula 3. I never did Formula 3 in my career because when I started racing, I was quite old. I did the A levels to go to university, and then I started racing with BMW. And the BMW racing director, Dieter Stappert, he said to me, listen, you should be doing Formula 3 because you've got no experience, but we can't offer you a Formula 3 drive because we haven't got an engine for it. What we can offer you is go racing in Formula 2 with the March BMW Works team in England for the European Championship. And being who I am, I said, well, no problem. Let's go ahead with Formula 2. So that's why I ended up in Formula 2. I spent a fair bit of time in the championship, but the problem was the Honda engine eventually because it was much better than the BMW. So then 3000 was good because I won the championship. And during the year 1985, I did my first Formula 1 Grand Prix. I think it was in Spa and then at Brands Hatch. And after that, come November, I was invited to do a Formula 3 race in Macau. And that was my first Formula 3 race after having done my first Formula 1 Grand Prix, which I think is absolutely unique.
It is indeed. And before we go into the more contemporary stuff, I really want to talk about that first Formula 1 experience because it came in so early into your career, right? I suppose only 4 years into your proper racing career, you were thrust into Formula 1 and into a team that wasn't really at the very top of their game, to be very respectful. Zach Speed Racing at that time. But then, was it very daunting for you? Because now when we hear experts like David Coulthard talk about getting into Formula 1, he says that a lot of drivers in the past used to feel there was a big jump that probably isn't there today. You feel the same? Was it somewhat of a dramatic experience
Yeah.
when you got in?
Well, it wasn't really a dramatic experience because, after all, it's a racing car, and I was used to racing cars quite well by then. The problem was, and that compared to nowadays, the big problem was that you couldn't really test the car. There was no money, no budget, no nothing, and you just had to jump in and get on with it. And that was difficult because the car had a 1.5-liter turbo engine, which was very powerful. The car wasn't a very good car at all. It's never seen a wind tunnel. It was not anywhere near as good as the 3000 car I drove, or the 3000 cars I developed over the winter for March and Lolas. They were much better cars than the Grand Prix car I drove in my first Grand Prix. However, I still had to get on with it. And that's something that is nowadays quite a lot easier because the level of the technology level of a current Formula 1 car is so high that even the slowest car is actually quite nice to drive, and the operation of a car, like turning the steering wheel, putting a foot on the brakes and shifting and everything is dead easy nowadays. And that was difficult then because it was a real beast to keep it all together, and it was difficult but manageable for the good ones.
Wait, Christian, so in terms of the workouts, did you also go to the gym for 3 hours and do intense neck training like the modern Formula 1 drivers? Or was it more shoulder heavy? Because I can imagine no power steering, using the clutch, getting the shifts done. That's a workout on its own.
Yeah, but people regard the fitness of a Formula 1 driver as obviously very important, and they judge it by how many hours in the gym has the guy spent. And that is totally, utterly wrong, because what you need to drive a racing car is a long distance fitness. So you need to go running, trail running, racing bike, cross country skiing. And on top of that, you need some particular muscle zones, and you have to practice and train them. And that, of course, I did. But I was quite fit, and I was for the time then. I didn't have any problems apart from my sheer size, which was in these cars a problem because there were no rules which defined the size, the internal size of a racing car. And that's why even kind of smaller people like Alain Prost and Piero Martini and these guys, they sat in the car with the shoulders sticking out in the breeze. And that was obviously not very funny for the neck, and for longer people like me, it was rather uncomfortable. And that's why I'm laughing when nowadays drivers complain about, oh, it's so hard. And it's just, Jesus Christ, it's not.
I actually have the best seat in the house when Samuel is interviewing you. I get to hear all the stories and ask my questions in real time. But going back to your part about drivers complaining, and I'm going to bring out a fact. When you raced your last season in 1989, there were 30 cars on the grid, right? Now we have troubles giving entry to the 21st and the 22nd car on the grid, right? How was it back then to be 30 really quick cars on the grid? I know you had a pre-qualifying and then a qualifying, etc. So there was a way to deal with it. But 30 cars on the grid, just how crazy would it get?
Yeah, well, 30 was probably a bit too much. But the 26 cars was the standard, and for Monaco it was 24 only. That was pretty much average year after year. I have to tell you two things. Number one, I think 24 or 26 cars for Formula One is a much better field compared to the 20 we've got now. But not so much as far as the spectacle's concerned, the actual racing and so forth. But it is more room for drivers in Formula One. When I was racing in Formula One, it was always very difficult, and the teams were about to go belly up on money issues and stuff. That's not the case anymore, because they're actually getting an awful lot of money from FOM, and they can actually survive almost without any sponsorship and stuff. However, it'd be good for motor racing if we had more cars in Formula One, because we then have more Formula One drivers. And every year there is a few guys that get stuck on their way up and they can't actually make it to Formula One. And that was better in the late 1980s. However, the quality of cars, you can't compare it with what we've got now. There's much better cars. The slowest car in the current field is about 1.5 or 2 seconds slower than the fastest. And the difference when I was racing was probably 6 seconds, something like that. So there was a much bigger difference.
Interesting. And can I also maybe quiz you a little bit about driver contracts back then? Because we're in the midst of a driver silly season. Everyone's trying to, more than 12 drivers are looking for spaces. How were contracts structured back then? Because when I was at Force India, it was fairly simple. You have a baseline fee, and then every point you scored, you got something. But you had an extra filter of, do you even end up qualifying for a race before you actually, because you could show up with all full fanfare and, have all tickets booked, and then you would see drivers, not everyone qualifying. So how was there a layered structure back then as well when you were racing with driver contracts?
Yeah, it was very simple. It was all, I had to rely on myself. It was responsibility, 100% responsibility with the driver. I got fuck all from the team. No points, no bonus, no nothing. I had a little bit of space on the overall, which I could sell, and that was it. I could then say, okay, there is a contract for some, I don't know, supplier or something, and I got a little bit of money. But at the end of the day, no. There was a contract, but there was nothing in it for me. Nothing. And I was not the only one with a kind of a contract like that.
I guess along with technology, even driver contracts have now become far more sophisticated in Formula One.
Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not. I don't want to take anything away from the current drivers. However, there is so much more money in the business nowadays compared to then. And the team, my team then, say in '89, was a small team, and they had no room for driver's budget. What they could do, they gave a little bit of space on the overall and say, okay, sell it and do whatever you want with it. If you sell it well, you earn good money. If you don't sell it well, you earn not so good money. And it was perfectly all right then, because the fundamental difference in how you approach the whole issue was responsibility for yourself. You've got to be responsible for yourself. Now, if you're listening to current drivers, everything is responsible. The track is not good, the curbs are too high, the FIA is stupid, the teams haven't done this, that, and the other, and the world is always the world's fault, never the driver. In my world of motor racing, there was no such thing. I had to be responsible for myself. If I hit the curb, my problem, and the car was broken. If I hit the wall, I can't complain about a bump or bad surface, or When I ran out of puff during a race, it was my responsibility to train harder. Not like, the Qatar race last year where everybody complained, oh, it's too hot. Well, surprise, surprise, it's hot in Qatar. And that is the biggest difference from then to now. It is a lot easier. It is still very difficult to go fast in a current Formula One car, absolutely. But there is a few other things which are a lot easier.
But on that, I really want to be touching upon what the scenario today is, Christian, because in that time, there was such a different era. Nowadays, things are all corporate, factory-backed. There's a literal corporate machine behind it all. And we've normally seen that Germany is different, be it in football, be it in racing as well. It's a country that embraces sports quite differently to any other country in the world. And that's evident in the culture and the way the fans follow, which is so beautiful to see. But isn't it weird that we don't really have a Grand Prix and we only have one driver, when a decade ago we had Nico Rosberg, Sebastian Vettel, Michael Schumacher as well at that point, and there were drivers like Mick Schumacher up in the ranks? Like, where has it all gone wrong?
Well, there's two things I can tell you on that point. Number one, it's a natural thing. It goes up and down. Look at the Brazilians, look at the Italians. Sometimes we had 7 or 8 Italians in the field. Now we have not a single one. Same with the Brazilians. We had the Piquets, the Sennas, the Barrichellos and all that. And now what we've got. And that's a natural thing. It actually happens country to country. What was amazing, though, was, however, when Michael actually followed me into Formula One. In 1990, I was still developing Honda engines and Bridgestone tires for Formula One in Japan. And he was only 91 when I went to the States and raced in Indy cars and kind of gave up on Formula One. So Michael was the next. But Michael was, number one, an extreme talent, and he lucked in at the right moment, because like every great driver in the history of Formula One, you need the right time for your skills. And Michael was a very hard, very extremely talented and very hard driver, and that suited these cars very well. And then on top of that, he had the right people looking after him, like Flavio and Benetton, and then Jean Todt at Ferrari and so forth. He made the best of it. Now coming back to Germany. Germany never had a driver like Michael who was winning. I was never winning in Formula One. I mean, I was reasonably popular as a driver, but not anywhere near Michael's status. Michael was the first one who introduced Formula One to the country of Germany. And luckily, I was part of it because I did all the commentary for it. So at least, although I thought, good, I wish it was me, but you have to be open. Michael was a much faster driver than I ever was. And then you look at it and you feel kind of privileged that you are allowed to actually follow such a fantastic driver all the way through his career. And you're right there. I saw him race every race. And the good thing was that he actually conquered people in Germany, conquered the hearts of people in Germany who weren't motor racing enthusiasts whatsoever. I mean, they were just normal people. They said, Michael, he just drives faster than the others, and that's fantastic. And he was a reliable bloke. He kept winning. And, this opened motor racing for a crowd that wasn't even anywhere near being a racing nerd by any means. And the problem with it was, however, that, how shall I say, I kind of grew up in England, with my racing career. And British motor racing is something very traditional, very fair, very hard, and full of spirit. There is a lot of motor racing spirit in England, which I absorbed when I was living there, and I loved it, and I still do love it. In Germany, they had no clue. They just thought he drives fast, and that's it. And that led to, how shall I say, to an understanding which basically defined motor racing is Michael, which is not true. There's a lot of other guys out there who are also very good, and there's a lot of other championships. And this was good for Formula One in Germany, and everybody was mad keen on Michael, and he was such a hero. However, did they understand the true meaning of it all? No, because everything was Michael. Formula One was, okay, it's Formula One, but Michael he did an extreme favor for Formula One in the country. And years later, come Vettel and all the others, the reason was that Michael prepared this kind of playground. And that's why we all have to be very, very thankful and grateful to him that he actually achieved what he did achieve in this country. Now it's just gone down a little bit and it'll come up again. And, I'm not worried.
A bit of a nerdy question here. I find it fascinating that a lot of the German people associated motor racing with Michael because at that time as well, the DTM was on, the Nürburgring 24 Hours were on, and in their glory, lots of German teams were doing great in sports car racing. And Germany being on an automotive hub at that point, I would have imagined that a lot more people enjoyed racing, like they do right now as well in the country. Was it really not that case? Or did motor racing have a very niche audience, and then Michael was more of a cultural phenomenon than an athlete?
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. It's a niche thing, niche audience. It used to be a niche audience. And it's actually moving back to becoming, again, a niche audience because it's only on pay TV at the moment, apart from some races like 7 or 8, which we are doing on free TV. And that reduced the number of TV viewers dramatically. Where in Michael's days, we had at RTL something around 12 or sometimes even 15 million people watching. Now the Sky figures are down to something like 450, 500,000. And there's no real impact in the average, with the average people in the society. And that's also probably normal because you mentioned DTM or sports car racing, it's non-existing. I mean, DTM, I think they have 100,000 spectators for their first race. And WEC, I don't know, probably 50 or 60,000, that's nothing.
I mean, living in India, those sort of numbers seem like a dream, but I get where you're coming from in terms of the perspective of it. But I really want to understand just how big was it? Because when you see the Netflix documentary on Michael, you get an understanding of how big he was to the motor racing world. But in Germany, just did you see him on the front pages every single day? Were there commercials constantly featuring him? Was he the talk of the pub all the time? Like, how big was he back in the day?
He was very, very, very big. Everybody knew him. So you could ask anyone out there, whether it was in the bakery or you went to the butcher, you went to the restaurant, and anybody knew, absolutely everybody knew Michael. So he was more popular than any other sports star ever because he was so successful and he was so, because of the television we did at RTL, it was free TV. We actually delivered whatever they wanted to see every fortnight or every weekend whenever there was a race. We delivered it into the living room. And that was, even now I get really sweet mails from people who say, Mr. Dana, it's so great to have you back on the TV screen because I grew up with you. I was a 5-year-old boy when my grandmother and my grandfather were watching Formula One, and that was with you, and it's so good to have you back and so forth. Sweet. I mean, it's absolutely touching, but it shows you it is more than just an impact of a racing driver. It was an impact of a phenomenon. First time ever Formula One driver wins races, Michael Schumacher, and everybody in the country believed he can walk on water. He couldn't, but they believed it.
And on that, I really get so curious to know about the impact that Sebastian Vettel had on that, because he carried on the legacy in such a spectacular fashion, 4 consecutive titles, and he was very much a man of his own, very different in terms of his view on the world, his openness to talk about things outside of racing, his non-use of social media, which is quite something as well in the modern day and age. But did he really inspire a generation in the same way as Michael, or did he have the same impact on the youth in that regard?
No, Michael was a very different person. I mean, first of all, you mentioned social media. I mean, the internet was hardly invented then, so there was obviously no social media. So even if he wanted to, he couldn't have done it. Sebastian didn't like the social media at all. He's changed his mind a little bit, but he's very careful how he's using it. So coming back to how shall I say, Sebastian was very, 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 very different to Michael, because Michael came from, how shall I say, I don't want to be rude by any means, because I admired Michael all the time because of his driving, but his level of education was fairly basic. He had no real idea, Sebastian Vettel did his qualifications for the university, and he was a totally intellectually totally differently prepared for the world compared to Michael. Michael had to learn the hard way, and he did learn fantastically, but it was a very different approach. His friends are different, his lifestyle was different, pretty much everything was very different, and that's why he didn't really hit the people's heart in the same way that Michael did. Michael was a very down-to-earth, very average kind of a person that everybody could see. It's almost me. Sebastian was a little bit more intellectual, and therefore he didn't have the same reach, if you know what I mean. And please, I enjoyed very much meeting both of them, because they were different characters. And the good thing is that, whoever you are and wherever you come from, you got a chance. And Michael took his chance and Sebastian took his chance. They were different. And the fact that they were so different is also one of the reasons why Michael was more popular. Michael was the first to achieve all that, and Michael was from a different group of the society, which basically made him everybody's darling. Sebastian was slightly different. Everybody liked him. He was a very positive man, but he was very different,
But was the sport as big as that point? Because in Sebastian's glory days, we had him. Nico Rosberg was also almost there at winning races. Nico Hülkenberg was on the grid. Adrian Sutil was on and off at that point. The German Grand Prix was alternating between Hockenheim and then the Nürburgring. It's almost perfect. Was the sport bigger than it has ever been at that point?
No, the sport was biggest with Michael. We had 2 races, one in Hockenheim, one at the Nürburgring. Both were sold out. It was just incredible with Michael. With Sebastian, it was still big, but it was a lot less. And the reason we had so many drivers was the fact that there was quite a lot of money coming from Germany into Formula One. And that brought more German talent into Formula One. And you rightly mentioned Adrian Sutil or Nick Heidfeld or Heinz-Harald Frentzen. And there was just plenty of them. And Michael was the door opener for them. And they actually made it. And I mean, Sebastian was inspired by Michael when he was a small boy. And that's why Michael did such incredible good for Formula One in this country. You know, he opened a lot of doors for a lot of young drivers. And it's a little harder now again, but but still, that's what he did. And that's what happened following Michael was plenty of German drivers, yes.
Let's hope that Michael is able to come back to normal life, as we would call it. Of course, you know, the unfortunate accident and the inspiration that you said that he was for Vettel, and much as he was for millions of others, fans and budding drivers. I remember I took to Formula One and to wanting to, you know, race cars because of Michael Schumacher himself, you know. But if I could stay on with Sebastian Vettel, you know, such a statesman, such an enigma, you know, won so many races, and I think his exit from Formula One, you know, with Aston Martin was slightly out of frustration, ill-timed, didn't have the right project. Now he's making all the noises again. I'm willing to come back. I'm waiting to come back if the project is right. Do you believe that that's actually true and possible? Would you know if there are things actually happening, you know, in the background, given again how dynamic the driver market is this year?
Well, to give you a straight answer, no, I don't think so. No. I mean, Sebastian Vettel was an incredibly young man when he entered Formula One, and he looked even younger. And I remember I had a glass of wine at the bar with Charlie Whiting, who was the racing director in these days. And Charlie and I go way back, and we always had a chat during the weekends and, you know, in his office or about the weather and starting procedures. And, you know, I just turned up at his place occasionally during a race weekend. We had a chat, and it was lovely. And that evening, it was Herbie Blash, his assistant then, and him and Charlie, and we just sat together having a glass of wine at the hotel bar. And Charlie said, "Well, Christian, what a wonderful, wonderful young man, this Sebastian." And I said to Charlie, "You're absolutely dead right. A wonderful young man." But even wonderful young men become not so young men eventually, and they grow into probably even more wonderful men. And Sebastian was actually developing his character and his ideas and his thoughts and everything. And he just reached a point where it didn't make sense any longer. And that's why he quit. And it was not like the Lauda thing or Michael quit because he had to. He never wanted to quit. They basically threw him out. And he had this feeling that there was more in him, and you know, and that's why he did a comeback. With Sebastian, with the Porsche and with long distance and Le Mans and something, he loves racing. So maybe that's realistic. In Formula One, I don't think so.
Wait, that nugget there, I need to pick it up. Why do you think they threw him out? Now, we all know that's the case. We all know that Ferrari very unceremoniously dragged him out there. But why do you think so? Because the commercial engine was running well. Performances were never an issue. Fitness with Michael Schumacher can never, ever be an issue. What just happened there?
No. Luca Di Montezemolo had a clear idea that it was time for Michael to go. Because don't forget, he was Luca Di Montezemolo, the president of Ferrari at that time. He was a very dominating character, and he had everything he wanted, and he got not only the most tremendous amount of salary, he also had such a privileged status in the team that it was time for the president to think about the actual structure of his team. Is it good to have a driver where nobody else could exist next to him? And let's face it, all the people who were next to him never really made it because Michael was much better. And then the day came when you have to rejuvenate your team and prepare for the next future. And that was the only reason why they said, thank you very much, you're wonderful. But he didn't want to stop then, for sure not, no. Well, in my opinion, anyway. I mean, how I see it, how I look at it, you know.
Yep. And with that, we eventually did see his legacy being carried on with Mick Schumacher, which was such a touching moment to see him in Formula One. And we all knew it was coming, right? Looking at his talent in the junior formula, looking at the way Ferrari earmarked him as one for the future, it felt like it would be eventually his seat after Carlos Sainz. But it all faded away. And in many people's opinions, Christian, and in my opinion as well, I do rate him as quite a decent driver from what I see. But clearly, that was not the case at Haas. Was it his talent lacking, or was it just the wrong environment for him to enter Formula One that maybe didn't work out? How do you view it?
A difficult question. I tried to give you a decent answer. Well, first of all, in this country, everybody believed he's going to jump into a racing car, he's going to finish in the points in the first season, he's going to be a Ferrari driver and it keeps winning races like his father did. Which is, the general public were convinced this is going to happen. And the tabloids and everything, and everybody was like that. I had a very different opinion because I knew his career. I knew how there were actually the people around him were helping and pushing and actually making life as easy as possible on his way into Formula One. So he drove very well in Formula 2. He then got into Formula 1 and very clearly wasn't up to it. He did a lot of testing, he was prepared and Ferrari and so on, but he wasn't up to it. And he then didn't realize that I have to raise my game. Whatever I've done so far is not enough. And you can't do it from one day to the other. And that's how come that he was crashing all the time and he was slow. He was actually very slow in the beginning. And eventually he got better, but it is never easy to drive a slow car or in a slow team because, I know what I'm talking about. These cars don't give you back what you invest in them. You give it all. You give it your heart, your blood, your soul. You give it your grandmother on top of it, no problem, just to go faster. But the reward is nothing because you're always P15 or 20. He was most of the time P20 or P19 anyway. So the reward is nothing, and that is difficult. So it is actually very difficult. But I think 2 years that Mick had in Formula One was plenty of time to show to the rest of the world that I'm actually pretty special. And that is not what he showed to the rest of the world, because Mazepin, the teammate, was nothing. And Kevin Magnussen was good, and he wasn't anywhere near Magnussen. And you see what Hulkenberg does now with Magnussen. You see this is where you should be when you come to Formula One and you want to prove that you're a future world champion. That's exactly how Michael came to Formula One. Michael came to Formula One and he was, P5 first practice. Yeah, you need luck. You need the right car. There's too much sentimental feelings probably behind Mick, and not so much from the public point of view, and not so much, analysis. So, an unemotional analysis of where are we at. And there is quite a few people out there in the paddock who I've spoken to, including Gunther Steiner, who was very unemotional about it. He said, well, Jesus, the bloke is actually sweet and I feel sorry for him, but, that's not the way to become a good Formula One driver. And he had his chance. Whether he's ever going to get another one, I have my doubts.
That's actually very nicely summarized, because The driver market, like I said, is fully open. We all know that. But there is very little talk of Mick getting a seat in. If you ask Alpine, they say actually he's contracted to Mercedes for Formula One, and Mercedes has an open cockpit, of course, with Lewis going to Ferrari. And, Toto Wolff was very vocal last year about the good work Mick was doing in the simulator and in the behind the scenes. But when he's got a seat open at Mercedes, he's probably made no noise about putting Mick in that seat either. So it seems extremely difficult. Yeah, it seems extremely difficult that he's probably going to make a comeback, get a second chance to Formula One. Or do you probably think sports car, if he does well, because Alpine has now said, wow, he's driven some lap times we never imagined, right? So that the PR machinery is back at work again. Do you believe that he could probably, would you give him a second chance? Let me flip that around.
That's a hard one, this one is. I would say it's very unrealistic to have a driver who had his chance back in Formula One because he does well in a sports car. So many good sports car drivers out there. If I was a team owner, like, say, Toto Wolff, I knew everything about the driver from the simulator, from the car, because he's done some testing for them too. I would know everything anyway, and I would then have my reasons to say, no, I need someone better. And that's what Toto did. He said, it's all fantastic and he helps us a lot. Well, that was PR bullshit. Yes, he did a good job in the simulator, absolutely. I don't doubt that by any minute. But if he, nowadays in Formula One, everybody knows exactly what the opposition's doing. You know exactly how good or bad a driver is, how consistent he is. And so, I don't think that there is... Toto likes Mick, and he liked, obviously, Michael. But he has his reasons not to put him into that car.
And the driver who, replaced Mick in Formula One, Nico Hülkenberg, he's of course made headline news, right? Because I remember when Audi first bought Sauber and they were buying in incrementally, the conversation was 2026, Schumacher and Vettel at Audi. That's what the rumors at that time were. Who would have ever imagined that Nico Hülkenberg, after a 3-year absence, would actually make a comeback with Haas, show the world what they were missing and how good he was, and be Audi's first ever signing in Formula One, right? How do you rate Hülkenberg? Do you think he's underrated? And especially because of this whole stat that most races without a podium, right? But where do you think Hülkenberg fits within the talent pool currently in Formula One?
I think he's exceptionally good. And forget the fact that he hasn't finished a race on the podium. You must look at the races he did and what he got out of the car he's driven. And he got out of the car most of the time, whatever was in it, and that was it. And if the car wasn't good enough for P3, it was probably good enough for P5 or P4 or P10. And he always squeezed out the maximum. And give him a car that's better, and of course, naturally, he's going to be on the podium. I rate him extremely high because he's very professional. And he's no bullshit. He's no bullshit. He's just fast, reliable. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. And that's exactly what the team needed after someone who kept telling them, I need to learn this and I need to learn that. There's no time to learn nowadays. You have to deliver immediately. And I think it's very good for him. It's very good for Audi. It'll be tough, though, but... I think his bank account will appreciate.
I must add some more context to you saying him being very professional and a very friendly driver, because I spent years with him at Force India, and especially the year when he was a test driver, he made a lot of trips to India for the junior driver program for the sponsors. And he and I actually spent a lot of time just talking about life in general. And I would always walk away saying, wow, if this is how a Hulk is supposed to be, the Hulk should be as gentle as how Nico is. So it gives me awesome pleasure, when I see him doing well. I drop him, a text or through here and now saying, wow, it's amazing to see you do so well. But, like you said, Audi is going to be tough. Audi is going to be where he gets his chance, hopefully, with 2026. But would you know more about the Audi project? Right, because there's a lot of secrecy, a lot of things not being spoken, also out of the context that they want to give Sauber and previously last year Alfa Romeo all the respect for all the money they've put in. But why is there so much? Why should a Formula One fan be positive about Audi entering 2026, apart from the fact that there's just a new manufacturer coming in?
Well, yet again, a very good question, because Audi, the mentality within Audi is very simple. Whatever they started in racing, they won it. Whether it was rally, whether it was the pre-war stuff, whether it was touring cars or Trans Am, whatever they did in the States, whether it was DTM, whether it was Le Mans with all sorts of cars and regulations, with a diesel and with a Spider and with a coupe and whatever. But they always won. And that is probably by far the biggest problem of the whole project, because it's never been so difficult. And I don't think inside Audi, they're aware of the difficulties you have in Formula One. The people, Andreas and these guys who are running the show, they know, obviously. But it's going to be very, very difficult. And the approach and the expectations are not easy to compensate,
But on that, it's sort of now Sauber becoming Audi. And again, with Sauber, it's a team that has previously also gotten a manufacturer in the form of BMW. And that eventually didn't quite work out very well with the financial crisis coming in, the mistiming of it all. It was almost about to peak, and then it went away. But learning from BMW would be Andreas Seidel, because he was there at that time and he's now leading that project at Audi. What do you think Audi has to do differently than what BMW did to make sure that this project works?
Well, more patience, and they have to invest zillions and zillions again. It's not done with what they think it is, because Hinwil, my girlfriend, lives very close to this place, and I'm there. I drive past every now and then. I know the place, and it is, last time it was renovated and brought up to speed and up to spec was with BMW. They are way behind on construction and on production and construction facilities, let alone the development, and all that. It's not just, I think Audi inside, they're underestimating it. Totally underestimating it. They think we're Audi and we're going to win and we're the best anyway. I tell you, the task is tremendous. They have, in Andreas, they have a very, very good man who knows what it takes. Whether they're ever going to get there, I don't know, because at the moment, the team is so far away from the Red Bulls and the Mercedeses and the Ferraris and even now the Aston Martins of this world. It'll be a very much of an uphill struggle, and it just depends on whether they hang in there for long enough. But you saw with BMW, there's always a reason to pull the plug, and there's always a reason for any manufacturer to pull the plug, because if this is good for the company, the shareholders and all the rest of it, they pull the plug. They don't do it like a racing team that hasn't got anything else but its racing activities. You can't pull the plug on yourself. You can pull the plug on an activity that you're trying to use to boost your image and your technology. But we will see. It's pretty much of an uphill struggle. I think it won't be easy at all for Audi and Sauber as such.
I think the one driver who you need to take on the drive path that you said to around Hinwil is Carlos Sainz, because it's of course known in the paddock that Audi's made a significant offer to Carlos Sainz. He's waiting to see whether to take it or not. His answer will depend on Max Verstappen and what he does. And, Carlos Sainz made a very interesting statement, which I thought was a bit of a giveaway. He said, nobody knows where they're going to be in 2026. It's all a lottery, right?
Yes.
But with the insights that you've shared, that Audi is up for an uphill challenge, maybe at least it'll help Carlos make up some sort of a mind whether or not to take up the offer. But do you believe that that's where the crux of the driver market is right now? What Carlos is going to do, and hence before that, what Max Verstappen is going to do, and that's Audi's main game plan?
Well, number one, Carlos Sainz Jr. knows very well what's going on because of Carlos Sainz Sr. Carlos Sainz Sr. is very well connected to the Volkswagen hierarchy because of his own history. He's very well connected into Audi, and not only top floor management, also the operating level of it. So he knows damn well what's going on and where the tasks and the challenges are. So Carlos's words, I appreciate what he said, and I actually absolutely 100% right, spot on. The driver market, as you mentioned, is a little bit is a little bit crazy because it depends very much. Okay, Lewis started it all off with his move to Ferrari. Ferrari then had to decide, who am I going to sack and who am I going to keep? The fact that Carlos now seems at least as good or even better than Leclerc doesn't make the situation any easier. For Carlos Sainz, the problem is, I'm sure he's speaking to Mercedes. It's a possibility. I'm sure he's speaking to Audi. It's a possibility. Who else is he speaking to? I don't know what other things are interesting for him. But the driver market depends now very much not on the drivers, but on Adrian, what Adrian's going to do. If Adrian Newey is actually leaving Red Bull, then there is no reason for Max to stay more than a year, because whatever is run and is designed now is still Adrian's car for next year. But then eventually they're going to run out of momentum without Adrian. There's no doubt about it. So wherever he goes makes a big change to the rest of the driver market, because, Verstappen can easily go to Mercedes if Adrian Newey is not staying with Red Bull. And then, of course, the Red Bull is still a very attractive team. So maybe Carlos is then going to go there. But it depends on Adrian and on the general situation more than the driver market only.
Wow, who would have thought, a designer having so much impact on the way the market functions? I mean, we truly are in such an unprecedented time. And on Adrian Newey, right, everyone has their own opinion. I know we all have spoken about it. I'm sure you must have had a thought about it as well. Where do you think he's going? I mean, I just have to ask it, right? I know it's all in his head, but It's such a difficult question to ask, because unlimited money at Aston Martin, you can speak English, you can stay where you are, you can work with Fernando, versus the one missing chapter in your life and career, Ferrari. What a choice, huh?
Well, I know Adrian since 1982 when he ran my Formula 2 car. It is a person who is very, very keen on racing. He loves designing racing cars. He loves to go racing, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with politics and all this. And this is why he is in a position where he says, "Well, I might want to leave," and he might actually he will actually leave. I don't know. It's not finalized and not confirmed, but it's likely. So I think, in a way, he has not been at Ferrari, and everybody wants to go to Ferrari, and maybe the structure there is now what he needs and what he likes. But I can't tell you, because Adrian is very British, obviously, and whether he can actually do what he wants at Maranello or not, I can't tell you. It's only him who can decide, because he knows what he wants and what he needs. I have no idea where he's going. Absolutely no idea. I mean, the obvious ones, Ferrari. Everybody wants to go Ferrari. Yeah, fine, yes. But what am I expecting there? Are they all going to like me or not? And the history of British designers in Ferrari is only really Rory Byrne from South Africa, who was involve designers. I'm not talking technical directors like Ross. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. I really don't know.
And that's the best part, is it not, Christian? The fact that all of us are completely unaware of what his next move could be, and we're all on the hooks. Like, what is he going to do next? What a time to be a Formula One fan. But before we conclude, Christian, lastly, we have to touch upon the last German world champion, and it's kind of absurd, right? That even though he is a champion, and we eventually end up talking about him at the very end, maybe that's just the nature in which his efforts are recognized. But Nico Rosberg, do you get a feeling that he's somewhat underappreciated in your eyes? Because nowadays he's getting a bit of a resurgence in popularity, at least with the commentary that he's doing, which is quite sharp and quite incisive.
Well, yes. The thing is that everybody believes he's German, but he never lived in this country. He lived in Monaco he was born in Wiesbaden in Germany, and then the family lived in Monaco. So he's not German like Vettel, who grew up here, who went to school here. I mean, Rosberg went to school in Monaco. Number one. Number two, the fact that he won the world championship is something, and I told him that because I get on with him really well, and we work together on television and stuff, and we have a chat whenever we see each other. I think he did the most incredible job to beat Lewis, because these drivers like Lewis, they are so incredibly good, and he beat him fair and square. However, it consumed a lot of energy. And the reason why he mightn't be as popular as, say, Vettel or Schumacher, of course, is the fact that he quit after he won. And, you need a few years in the business, and you need a few years at the very top end to remain in the public eye. And that's what he didn't do, because he said, I'm gonna go for the children, and for my wife, and for my private life, and it wasn't even true, because the first thing he did is sign a contract with Sky to do television in Formula One. So it's a bit kind of I fully understand him, and appreciate what he's done, but the fact why he's not so popular is probably these two reasons. Number one, he's Monegasque, and number two, he's not stayed there as a world champion, and he wasn't prepared to continue, which I appreciate. I don't blame him like Niki Lauda blamed him a lot, and he was very cross with him. And I said to Niki, no, I think it's his responsibility, and he knows himself better than anybody else. So he can take the decision every which way he wants. And when he retired, I think the timing wasn't quite brilliant then, but that's fine, and I'm with him, and I like his analysis. He's a little anti-Lewis occasionally, but which I can laugh about it like you can.
I mean, fair enough. Just a little bit would be okay after you've done so much in beating him. It's fun to listen to him. Do you get a chance to listen to his stuff sometimes, Christian?
Yeah. I can. Nowadays on social media and you can get the clips from whatever he says and mentions in the internet easily. So yeah, I'm not going to be watching him live on television because I'm doing my own job. But I follow his words.
But on that, we should now also move on to Ayrton Senna. Unfortunately, 30 years since the day where both him and Roland Ratzenberger unfortunately passed away, Imola 94. And it was a time that was absolutely different from what we currently have. And I firstly, Christian, want to know your story of it. Like, where were you at that time? Were you at the races covering it for RTL? And if you were, what was it like?
I was racing somewhere else with DTM, I think, and I called Heinz-Harald Frentzen after it had happened, and we were both talking to each other without saying a word, because none of us could actually believe what had happened. And, it is up until now, today, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you think this has not happened. And you think, oh, no, it was Imola and he got killed. And it kind of appeared or happened to me occasionally that Ayrton, Ayrton was such an incredible personality that you just don't want to believe it has happened. And now, all these years later, it's still the same. And I tell you what, sometimes I meet Roland Ratzenberger's father, who lives in Salzburg, not far away from here. And I get the impression he still hasn't swallowed it somehow. He sometimes, I'm sure, he gets up in the morning and says, no, it can't be true. And then, of course, he's liaising with reality, and he has to say it is true. But with me and Senna, I liked him an awful lot, and I had the privilege to actually race in the same championship with him. And he was the most extraordinary character that I ever came across. And for me, he is light years ahead of anybody else. And not only his way of driving, but also because of his personality. And really, when I think of Ayrton, I can tell you a funny little anecdote.
Of course.
Not from the days then, but a guy called Joe Ramirez. Joe Ramirez used to be the team manager at McLaren in the Senna days. And when Joe was retired, Ron Dennis kind of threw a little invitation. I wouldn't want to call it a party, but everybody was involved and everybody was invited. The lads, the mechanics, and a lot of paddock people. That was in the Idle York Museum in Indianapolis, an Native American Indian art museum, which was a very nice location. And I remember we were standing there having a beer, chatting along, and there was big, huge photographs of the drivers appearing on the screen, like a huge screen there was. And there was Martin Blundell, and there was Prost, and suddenly there was Senna. And at this moment, the whole party went silent. And I still get very strange feelings when I remember that moment. That was the case. You didn't really have to say anything. It was as if Jesus Christ himself entered the room for a second and said, remember? And then went again. Everybody went quiet. I mean, there was 150 people all chatting and having a beer in their hands. And there was a picture of Ayrton, and it went quiet. That was Ayrton Senna. He wasn't just a driver. He was from another planet, let's call it that way. So he meant a lot to me. He helped me personally too, in some difficult moments. I mean, what a privilege I had to actually get on with this kind of person, He was very demanding, We went water skiing one day in Austria between the Budapest Grand Prix and the Austrian Grand Prix. And we were all in the same hotel. Gerhard Berger, Alain, myself, who else was there? Can't remember. And in the morning, Gerhard had this boat to go water skiing, and we went water skiing early in the morning, which is very nice because the lake is very flat. And it was Gerhard's boat. Well, a friend of Gerhard's, and therefore Gerhard's. So Ayrton was there and happy to go water skiing, and he just simply took over. He was the captain in no time. We just sat there and were waiting for him to call his shots. And shit, he was a good water skier too, I tell you. A lot better than Gerhard and I together. But anyway, there's lots of funny little stories to be told. But the first one I gave you from Joe Ramirez's party, that probably says it all. It does say it all. He was very, very different to everybody else I ever met.
What year was this again, if I may? Was it at the time when he was driving? Or
No. This was Joe Ramirez was retired in 2000 and...
it was back then. Okay, that late. Okay.
Indianapolis Grand Prix. When was the first Indy Grand Prix?
The first Indy was
on the new track.
One, right? I suppose. 2000?
It was a little later than that. It was first or second race. It was years after he passed away.
What a personality, and yeah, still get goosebumps listening to his stories every single time. And
yeah.
Well, I can't help it. It's just there,
It's unbelievable. Well, what else can we talk about, Christian? I really want to know your thoughts on Porsche, because for me, that story was also so big that while Audi was preparing an entry, while Ford was also getting their way in, Porsche were also having chats with everyone. I mean, if the rumor mill was correct, they spoke to all the big teams and had the potential of manufacturing their engines. And it seemed odd to me, because why would the Volkswagen Group have two of their brands trying to enter at the same time? I mean, they really must have loved Formula One at that point to think about it. But what just happened there? Why did it all not work out? And why have Red Bull opted for Ford instead of Porsche?
Well, Red Bull didn't opt for Ford instead of Porsche. Red Bull opted for remaining independent and do whatever they want to do. I can understand that, because they always thought that they are depending too much on the engine manufacturer. They had a very, very bad relationship with Renault, because Renault never did what they wanted, or at least that's the Red Bull point of view. And eventually they lost a lot of championships simply because the Mercedes engine was so much better, and it was a significant advantage to have your own car and engine. With these complicated, not engines anymore, they're called powertrains nowadays. So this is when they always wanted their own engine. And once Dietrich Mateschitz finally agreed to, now, okay, we've had enough, because the Honda thing was a lot of Red Bull input, technical input, until it became successful. They said, no, we do our own thing. And eventually that led to the Ford thing, which was then, okay, how about that? We're Ford, and we jump onto the development which they've done or they've been doing. That's what it was. And the Volkswagen thing, internal politics, crazy politics. I don't know.
It's absurd. Were you as confused as well at that point? Like Ford, a Porsche and Audi both at the same time, and there were people who have actually pulled their entries out from WEC together.
I wasn't surprised. It was in a way, it was close to what you had to expect from a company called Volkswagen, or a big holding. They were always kind of strange. At Le Mans, they raced each other with Porsche versus Audi. And so it was no surprise for me that they were planning to go ahead with the same project in Formula One. It doesn't make any sense at all, as you all know, but it's Volkswagen, They just do it their way. Fine, I appreciate that. Fair enough.
And as we speak, I just got a word from Kunal. Wait, is it true that Adrian Newey is leaving, Kunal, just as we are recording?
Yes. The news has just been confirmed.
It's quite likely that he's going, as I mentioned in this recording earlier on. The official confirmation wasn't out yet. If it is out now, nothing has changed. It doesn't surprise me. And, it came from likely to a fact. So, well, fine. The interesting thing is not that he's leaving. Where is he going to?
Exactly.
Yeah, well.
Crazy how it's all working out. Well, but this was so much fun. Seriously, Christian. I mean, I have had the time of my life, literally, listening in and just enjoying. Seriously, thank you. Thank you for taking out the time today.
I thought you were going to ask me about the new German drivers and, who is coming next and all the rest of it. And no, you see, the thing is, we do have a good German lad, a young driver called Tim Tramnitz. He's racing in Formula 3. And what I wanted to say, and that maybe is a good end of the whole story, people look at Formula One nowadays and they say, it's all so different. You can't compare it to Formula One when you drove it, or to racing cars when you drove. And it's all technology and it's all fantastic. And I said, well, still at the end of the day, you have to drive the car. And I was in Misano, a little racetrack in Italy, for the Formula E race to do some business there. And I ran into this guy, Tim Tramnitz, and a 19-year-old kid. You know, he started the year very well. And we talked about balance of cars and how to cope with the tire performance and about steering angles and slip angles and car setups. And that's when I was so happy in a way, because there's a young guy who's just at the beginning of his career in Formula 3, in a modern world of Formula 1 and in the modern world of, say, Grand Prix racing. And we're talking about the same fundamentals like I've done with Johnny Cecotto, with Ayrton Senna, with Gerhard Berger, with Alain Prost, with everybody I spoke to about cars. It's never changed. And that is something that I wanted to mention at the end of this interview, because many people believe these old farts, they got no idea. We might not have the same approach as far as social media is concerned, although you can reach me on social media. But, you know, the laws of physics haven't changed, and the general understanding in motor racing is still the same. You should win the race and not lose it.
Yeah, and also the fundamentals. I like that you mentioned that, because so many drivers miss out on that. But every good national champion I've spoken to here in India also says the same thing. Might be any car in the world, but if you know how to drive a race car, you can drive anything. And that's such a...
It's 4 contact patches. And you're fighting the laws of physics, and the big hero in that respect is you know, the law that any mass would like to stay where it is, and you have to overcome this problem. It's Sir Isaac Newton who defined it. So you read Sir Isaac Newton back in the 17th century or whatever, or 18th century, whenever he had that. This is a race car driver's day-to-day job, overcome these problems that Sir Isaac Newton had written down for the first time.
Maybe the next time we should chat about that in more depth as well, about how do you actually drive a race car, or rather drive any race car fast, because I know a lot of people listening in would love to get to those depths as well. And personally, I might be a little nerdy, because I'm looking at my sim rig right behind the screen. It hasn't been touched for a while because I gave up on that idea of trying to explore the laws of physics as much. So it'll be cool to listen in and get your insights on how to do better.
Very good.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
And the stories
I hope
were
you had a good time. Thank you.
unbelievable, seriously. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Before we ended, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with us on this episode of the podcast.